Hello and welcome to subpart 5.3 of the BMS modding tutorial series. In this, for the time being, last video on weapons I will discuss a subject that I forgot about in the general part 5.0. The subject is infrared and radar guided weapons. These weapons require an additional database record entry and potentially data files that you should be aware of when creating such weapons or transfer them to another database. There are many commonalities between both types, but also some specific differences. For this reason, I will discuss both separately. I will start with IR-guided weapons, where I will dive deep into the common and specific details. When I discuss the radar-guided weapons, I will dive equally deep into the specific details, but cut short on the common details already discussed under IR-guided weapons.
It is self-explaining that infrared-guided air-to-air or surface-to-air missiles are using different infrared seeker heads with different performance characteristics such as detection and acquisition range performance, gimbal limits or countermeasures resistance, and in Falcon BMS, these particular properties of infrared sensors are defined in the Falcon 4 ICD XML database file that is as usual located under Teradata objects, and within the database you will find them under sensors IR data. So what you can see is that we have a total of 61 ICD record entries identified by their respective index numbers, which is explained in previous videos, serves as a pointer or link to a particular record entry when referencing one from either another database record entry or external files. So let's simply open the record entry at the top for the seeker data on the AIM-9LM Sidewinder missiles. What you can see is the name that you can change if you want. You have the detection range displayed here in nautical miles impacting seeker detection acquisition performance. You have the field of view data, so indicating the instantaneous field of view, the gimbal limit in degrees, that's indicating the total angular coverage of the infrared seeker both in azimuth and elevation. You have the ground factor that's impacting detection acquisition range performance if the seeker is looking against the ground, and you have of course a flare chance in percent that indicates how susceptible an infrared sensor is to flares. So in this case we have a 5% chance that flares can spoof the missile. If it would be 0%, it means the missile can't be spoofed by flares. 100% means the opposite, that the missile will, so to speak, always be spoofed with flares. What's a useful feature is that used by button here at the top right, so you can see that there are different weapons that are actually referencing or using this particular ICD record. So what it also teaches us is not all infrared guided weapons necessarily need a dedicated ICD record entries. You can assign the same ICD record to as many missiles as you want, but of course it makes sense if you have dedicated performance data on an infrared sensor to create a separate ICD record if there's none available that matches the desired data. On top of this, there's also a dedicated IRST data file available. As you can see under SimSense data IRST, there are only a few record entries. We have one for the AIM-9L Sidewinder. If we open it, we can see the content is essentially the same as in the ICD record itself. The only real difference here is that you can separately define azimuth and elevation limits. What I can't tell at this point is how these dedicated DAT files are actually linked to a particular weapon, because there is not a particular index pointer or something like that in the IRST list file, you have the same logic as elsewhere, with the difference that the IRS file ending is in this case also required. So, what's particularly important about infrared guided weapons is that there are weapons within the database where you wouldn't expect them to use IR guidance. I've selected the example of the AGM 154C JSOC, the Joint Standoff Weapon, which is in reality an INS GPS guided standoff glide weapon, and it's also simulated that way in BMS, but as part of its guidance definition within the database, you can see under guidance IR is selected, and if that guidance IR is selected, you also need the seeker type, IRST in this case, and seeker version 37 in this case. You can directly assess the record entry by clicking on the seeker version button, and that one is for the AGM 154A, so it's a shared seeker entry. You can see it's used by a lot of different weapons, and as you have seen in the weapon data record entry, both the seeker type and seeker version fields are grayed out, so you cannot edit them herein. So what you have to do is to edit these within the weapons.dat file located under sim misdata. And down here you can see the seeker type. 0 is for infrared guided weapons, but only in conjunction with the guidance IR and the weapons data. You will also see seeker type 0 for other weapons, but in this case they won't have the seeker version that's defined here, so that's a pointer to ICD record number 37, that one for the AGM 154A. So you must edit it within the missile data file and not in the database itself. So as said, the same seeker can be shared by different weapons. The existence of a dedicated DAT file is not necessarily required, and as shown, only the elevation coverage is different, but at the moment I'm not sure whether the data content of the IRST files is even being processed by BMS or not, and if so, how the link is established, because I haven't found anything that points to a particular IRST DAT file. So that's essentially everything about infrared guided weapons. In this case, the JSOC is not infrared guided, but it is using IR guidance as part of its definition, so it requires an IRST seeker type and the seeker version entry accordingly. And you need to take this into account when creating a new weapon or when transferring such a weapon to another database. In this case, it makes very much sense to simply use an existing ICD record entry for some dedicated infrared guided air-to-air or surface-to-air missiles. It may make sense to create a separate one that matches the desired performance characteristics. So for radar-guided weapons, it's actually very similar. The difference is that radar sensor data are located under sensors radar data. This equates to the RCD or radar control data XML file, also located under TER data objects. For these, you are using the seeker type radar. Seeker version is not defined within the database record entry. It's instead defined here where seeker radar is displayed. So it's index number 4 is highlighted here under radar data. It's for the M120B MRAM in this example. And we can of course open directly its record from here by clicking on the seeker radar icon or by double clicking here under radar data on the appropriate entry. And we get it displayed. Once again, the radar name is displayed. For fire control radars that have a non-cooperative target recognition function or are supposed to be using one, You can click it here. Also detection range. RWR sound is a number that's linking to a particular sound file so that you get the different warning sounds triggered when your radar warning receiver, your aircraft is being painted by that particular radar. Similar for the RWR symbol that shows up accordingly. Low-eyed lethality is apparently reduced performance at low altitudes, same for high altitudes. You have the sweep rate, so the scan speed of that radar in degrees per second. Also the maximum scan width, supposedly in azimuth. I'm not sure whether it's also applicable to elevation. Coast time, can't exactly say what it actually means. In the past, there was a lock-on time value defined. Maybe, I don't think it's the same. You can define this nevertheless in the radar DAT file if one exists. You have the beam width that you can define, so to speak, the instantaneous field of view. Look down penalty means the degradation of performance when the radar is scanning against the ground. Notch penalty meaning degradation of performance if a target is beaming you. Chef chance equivalent to flare chance, and also jamming penalty. And the notch speed can be defined here in the radar data index. You essentially link or define, let's say, a specific index number. I am not entirely sure whether it is required to be entered here for the DAT file. In the past it was. At the moment, missiles don't necessarily, or missile radars don't necessarily have a dedicated DAT file that's mostly limited to fire control radars of aircraft or surface-to-air missile systems, so the fire control tracking radars. You will not necessarily find dedicated radar DAT files for missile seekers as such, so they're probably not required, but we can of course simply take a look at the RAD types list, and it's maybe referencing this line generic, but I'm not sure about this, to be honest. If you open a particular radar DAT file for a radar, you typically have the indication of index number, so it's linking from the radar DAT file to the corresponding record entry here. In this case, it's matching, of course. So the link between a particular DAT file is to the database record entry is located as shown at the top. So for radar-guided weapons, you probably don't need that file. You in fact don't stringently need it for infrared-guided weapons either, but you definitely need to link such a weapon to a particular RCD record entry. And as for infrared-guided missiles, you need to define the seeker type here within the weapons DAT file itself. So one is for radar-guided missiles, at least in conjunction with guidance radar selected in the weapon data record entry. Seeker version is not defined here because you can directly do this under weapon data. So that's an important difference compared to infrared guided weapons that needs to be taken into account. So also applicable as for infrared guided weapons is that you can of course assign the very same radar record entry to different weapons. There's in this case so-called ACD usage that's related to aircraft. We see none because the active radar seeker of a Phoenix missile is of course not used by an aircraft. And when you click on weapon usage, then you see, okay, this radar record entry is in fact used by the AIM-54AC Phoenix missiles, but also by the Russian R-37M. So same logic, same rules apply as for infrared guided missiles. Okay, so you are now aware of these particular aspects, and with this part I will for the time being conclude the videos, tutorial videos on modifying weapons in BMS. In the future there might be another video, but it's subject to some further testing, so stay tuned for future videos, not necessarily on weapons, but on aircraft, which is the next major subject that I will tackle with. See you then, ciao.